Welcome back to Sports Roundtable State News' Sports Podcast. I am Jacob Smith, joined by
Madi, Warden.
The dynamic duo is back. No guest today, but that's totally okay because we're saving it for a banger episode next week, but I am not spoiling that.
No spoilers.
No spoilers whatsoever today. We're going to keep that on the low key. But today we have a little bit of an interesting range of topics, a little bit different from what we're used to on the show. We're going to be talking men's basketball, of course. We will get to that because if you watched the game on Sunday, you probably have a hint of what we were talking about.
Yep.
But we're also going to talk a little bit of NFL and NHL, or NFL free agency and NHL, the trade deadline, because both of those were wild in their respective sports.
Yes,
and just to switch it up a little bit from college every once in a while and highlight some of the professional sports and what they have going on in their leagues. But should definitely be a very exciting and action-packed episode today. But without further ado, we're going to start with men's basketball.
Oh, boy.
Because this was some kind of game that they just had against Michigan on Sunday. But they won on Sunday against Michigan to close out the regular season, had the Big Ten championship banner raised. Very, very cool moment. They move up to number 7 in the AP poll with a 79-62 win over Michigan, which they were ranked number 17 on Sunday afternoon. Crazy game, crazy energy. What did you see? This was insane.
It was definitely some kind of something to see. Obviously good for Michigan State being able to sweep the Wolverines in back-to-back seasons, which is awesome for us. But man, oh man, was that an interesting game. I think, we were up by almost 30 points at the end of the first half. Michigan was just not producing and not playing very well, the team that they were used to seeing at the beginning of the season. Michigan was I think they were on a 2-game losing streak before coming into the Breslin Center, and obviously everybody knows that the Breslin Center is probably one of the toughest environments to play in college hockey.
Basketball.
Ooh.
We're foreshadowing.
Mun is tough to play in college basketball. The Breslin Center is absolutely one of the toughest places to play in. Everybody knows that. So Michigan was in for a ride on Sunday. And they made themselves a little comeback in the second half, but Michigan State was just dominant on all cylinders during that game. That was a great game for them. All around. But
yeah, it was definitely a one-sided game. I think most of the game. I think the biggest standout for Michigan State and what's been helping them win recently, especially down the stretch where they've won 7 in a row, is their guard play. Mm-hmm. It's been fantastic. We talk all the time about how deep it is. I'm not going to save the viewer. I'm going to save the viewers with mentioning that again.
Strength in numbers,
basically. But their guards have been absolutely insane, and that's what wins in March. Guard play, strong guard play wins in March,
absolutely.
Especially in the March Madness tournament. But Trey Holloman finished with 20 points on 8 of 12 shooting, very efficient. Mm-hmm. Jace Richardson also had 18 on 6 of 10. He's been some kind of story. Mm-hmm. And Jaden Akins even added 11 points with those 2 back-to-back threes early on, had the energy rocking the entire game. But I think that's just been such a big reason as why Michigan State's had so much success, especially with how many ranked games they played recently and heading into the Big Ten Conference Tournament and what ultimately led them to prevail to the Big Ten champions for the regular season. It's just been such a balance of play. And on the other side as well, they took care of business against Michigan, and Michigan's guards had pretty much the exact opposite of a performance of what Michigan State had. I'm looking for it here on my stats. I wrote it down somewhere, my goodness. But I believe they had 15 combined points from all of their guards, bench and starters. Michigan guards, bench and starters scored 15 combined points. I mean, unreal.
Absolutely insane. I mean, look at Trey Holloman had 20 points, and Michigan altogether had 15.
Off the bench, too.
That's wild. And Trey Holloman is off the bench, too. So it's just insane to see the players that we have had. Like Trey Holloman is now coming off of the bench because we've been starting Jace Richardson now in his place. But just seeing him come off the bench with 20 points compared to Michigan's altogether 15? Crazy. Are you kidding me?
It's unbelievable.
It is unreal. Another thing I wanted to kind of bring up was Michigan State has 12, high-ranked games. I don't remember what they call them.
12 quad one wins.
Yes, they have 12 quad one wins for the first time since 1995, 1996. Let me back up. For the first time since 1995, 1996, Michigan State has 12 quad one wins with no players that are first Big Ten. That's insane. That
Unbelievably
just
impressive.
shows you the depth of this roster. Again, we won't get into it too much because we've probably talked for a total of 4 hours about it on previous podcasts. But strength in numbers is such a huge thing, and it has been this whole season for this team because there's so many other players that could have been on Big Ten All-Team. And the only two on there were Jaden Akins and Jace Richardson. You look at how Trey Holloman has played this whole season. You look at how Simone Zapawa has played this whole season. Jackson Kohler, there's so many different players that have had such different roles and such big impacts on this team. And they didn't get a spot on All Big Ten. But again, that just shows you the strength and numbers of this team. It's insane.
Yeah. I mean, the numbers aspect is definitely undeniable, but I think it's just about how everybody else embraces their roles too. Holloman could have been furious when he got benched for a freshman, Jace Richardson. Obviously, that's not going to happen. Their teammates or whatever. But if anything, it made him play a little bit better. He embraced that role, realized that he can lead that second unit, especially as the guard, because Jeremy Fears and Jace Richardson probably aren't going to play as much when Trey Holloman's on the court. So that second unit is his, and he's thrived in that position. He's really been able to lead the unit. And he even gets some minutes with the starters as well. So it's totally fine for him. And I really, really like how they've embraced that role. And I know that we mentioned Michigan's guards were held to 15 total points. Vlad Golden had a really, really good performance for Michigan, put up 28 points, I think. But that's not a knock on Michigan State's Bigs defense either.
Absolutely.
Like, Golden is one of the best. He was all Big Ten first team, so one of the best players in the conference. But it's just Michigan State can lock down all facets of the game, and if not, at some points they can lock down most of them. And I think that's what's so cool about this team is they are so good at everything. I know their shooting has been their knock as well, but they've really stepped it up in the second half of the season. I mean, as long as they can shoot around 35-40% as a team for a game, they're going to be golden. They're going to be golden. They're going to win games, especially in the big tournament as well as March. But it's just been so cool to see how this team has really embraced each other, playing for each other, and playing for Coach Tom Izzo. He just won Big Ten Coach of the Year, and this man is 70 years old. I mean, if that's not a great culture, if that's not a great testament to what this team can be, because there's still a lot of season left, I really don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the fourth of his career, too, which is just wild for a coach that's been coaching as long as he has to have 4 Big Ten Coach of the Year awards. It's just so huge for him as a coach. And that was his 11th Big Ten regular season title, tied Bob Knight. And then there was one more coach on there, and I'm blanking who it was. But this has just been a year of record breaking for Tom Izzo. It's just been insane to see what he's been able to do with this team that didn't have that much. There wasn't a whole lot of spotlight around them at the beginning of the season, and they've come in and solidified themselves as probably a top 5 team in the country, even though the AP polls don't show us that. We all know that this is a team that can thrive in March.
Yeah, I mean, the metrics show it's an elite offense paired with an even better defense. They're like we said, they're great in all assets of the game. They've now won 7 straight games, like we mentioned, 5 of which were against ranked opponents. They've won 8 of their last 9. And during that 8 of last 9 game stretch, I want to mention Jace Richardson's been averaging 17 points per game. Holloman's also added 10 points per game. So like we've been saying, they've really stepped up. Holloman doing that off the bench. And that's such a big reason as to why this team has had success. It's honestly fantastic to see at this point in Izzo's career. And like you said, with the expectations, they were unranked coming into the season. So doing all of that is far more impressive than having a loaded roster, I feel like, coming into the season and still meeting or exceeding expectations. But moving on to the other facet of the game, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. There was a scuffle at midcourt at the end of the game where Michigan State seniors were supposed to do their kissing of the floor ceremony at center court. The big controversy was that L.J. Kaysen and Fat Brooks of Michigan stood right at midcourt where the Spartans are supposed to kiss the logo. Obviously, this didn't go over well. Frankie Fiddler was the first senior to go up and kiss the logo. He had to kiss it on the side, which I do really feel for him. That kind of ruins his tradition just a little bit, especially as a transfer coming in. But he had to kiss the side of the logo because those Michigan guards were still standing there. But after Frankie Fiddler kissed it, Trey Holloman went up to Kaysen and Brooks and pushed them both at the same time. Stood in his business, that the kids will say, and then it created a whole scuffle. I know this was kind of crazy to see in real time, live. Madi, what did you think about this scuffle.
I mean, there was a lot of videos as well out on Twitter, out on social medias, out on everything that Trey Holloman and Jaden Akins had both asked them to move before that. You could see it in a video that Trey and Jaden had both turned around and were like, "Hey, move out of the way. Like, we're trying to do something. Like, if you were a college basketball player, if you were a fan of college basketball, if you know Michigan State as well as people say they do, you should know that kissing the Spartan head has been a tradition for 30 years. So for them to just be disrespectful in that asset of standing at midcourt after being asked to move, I think that even Tom Izzo said Trey had every right to do what he did. He had already said move before, at least it looked like it from videos, and they didn't. And yeah, absolutely. I feel for Frankie Fiddler. I feel for the fact that he was a transfer student coming into this. He knew what he was coming into a program like Michigan State, and had to deal with the fact that there was opponents standing on the logo at center court.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating, especially as a fan, for Michigan to feel like they needed to do that. I don't know. I think there was a lot of frustrations that went into it. And yeah, I think Trey had every right to do what he did at that point.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I mean, Tom Izzo rewarded Trey by allowing him to kiss the logo during the post-game ceremony, just because that's what it means to play for Michigan State. Like, that's part of the tradition. And the fact that he really stepped up for himself and the program really speaks a lot of volume. And I don't think anybody else on this team would want to do that more than Trey Holloman. He's talked all the smack and everything this whole season. So really, really cool to see for his standard. And I like that Simone Zapala and Jaden Akins were able to do the tradition right after this whole scuffle kind of cleared. Definitely a really great thing, and how the tradition resumed. But it's just really unfortunate that I feel like that the Michigan and Michigan State rivalry across all sports is like still resulting to this kind of stuff. And I think in light of recent events like the tunnel incident and when Michigan players have came to Michigan State, Spartan Stadium, and kicked the logo pregame, just all that kind of stuff. Like, it feels like more often than not, there's something happening between these two schools. It's bound to get chippy as rivals, but I feel like sometimes it's a little bit crossing the line. I think it's hard to not believe that the Michigan players had no idea what they were doing. Exactly. I think they were standing directly on midcourt. I know that we were taking free throws, and that was what the timeout was for, but that was the exact place where it's always taken place. The court is huge. You can stand anywhere else on a free throw if you are not blocking out on the rebounding side. But just very unfortunate. I think that not to diss on Michigan here, but I feel like the accountability that they had and the credit they took for this incident was not very, very respectable, and it didn't really wow me as a neutral, or as a fan or whatever, from a neutral perspective. Dusty May commented that he was not aware of this tradition.
Which, if you were a college basketball coach or a college basketball fan or a player, how are you not aware of a tradition like that? It's so well known.
Exactly.
And I even said to my dad is a Michigan fan, so I have to deal with that sometimes. But I've spoke to the point of, you are stepping on our logo at center court. What would you do if a player came into your locker room and stepped on the block M? Exactly. It would have the same results as it did with them stepping on the Spartan logo. So what makes you think that it's any different for you to stand on our logo or for us to stand on yours?
Yeah, I mean, take a hint. That's pretty much what it is. And the fact that Dusty May still denied all this even after that, and the refs told him before the game or during the game, I know he mentioned it in an interview, that this was going to happen. So even if he wasn't somehow aware before, he was aware during or before the game.
Exactly.
So I feel like that kind of control of your players is definitely not the biggest and best message to send to your rival. It's bigger than sports, and it always has been. But he also went on Part of My Take today, the sports talk show, and he was like, well, if you have a logo so big, then I guess that's what happens when you have to kiss the logo, or something along those lines. And then he said, we'll get back to rolling. One, they weren't rolling because they got swept this year.
Right.
Two, Michigan's logo is just as big as Michigan State's is, and he also played or coached at FAU last year, and their logo was just as big as all three of them. So I just think very, very unrespectful for Michigan as a response. I'm not just saying that as a Michigan State attendee, as a student that's trying to diss on them. I feel like it was just like I said, some things are bigger than sports, and this was not a great representation of what Michigan can do to respond and acknowledge that. But just a very, very interesting like end to the game, and
Yeah.
it kind of sucks it ended that way, but the energy did also get back to it how it was during the game, after, and during the ceremony as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a first-year head coach as well, why are you? I don't think that's the impression that you want to leave on,
Most definitely.
especially rival teams. I think that as Michigan State fans, we can all say that we respect the heck out of John Beilein. He was a great coach for Michigan for how many years in the making. But for Dusty May to come in and know what was about to happen and still allow his players to take part in the actions that they did, I think that as sports fans, we all kind of lost a little respect for Dusty May. Even what he's done in such a quick turnaround program, from last year under Juwan Howard not making the tournament, just having a rough year on all edges, to getting into the top 25 this year and having a great Big Ten regular season. They still have a bye in the Big Ten tournament. Yeah. So I think that as a sports fan, I lost a little bit of respect for Dusty May, especially after hearing all the post-game interviews. And obviously there's a lot more to come of the season, a lot more years with Dusty May as head coach for Michigan. So we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, not a great way to start your tenure, I think. No. I think Michigan State fans had a little bit of respect even for him, just based on a season that he put together with a pretty much revamped roster. But now as this happened, and even Juwan Howard's had some controversy in his tenure at Michigan, just not a great start for May's perspective. But, I mean, they kind of picked the fight. It is what it is, so we'll see how it develops. I don't know if there will be much development over the next few years of it, but I'm sure for one thing, Michigan did learn their lesson, and that probably will not happen again. At least
Fingers
I hope not, because I did not want to go through that again as a viewer. But the Spartans are gearing up for March Madness now. They have received the first round bye with the 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament for their incredible season they put together at 26-5 during the regular season. They will face the winner of Indiana and Oregon Friday at 12 p.m. to kick off their tenure in the Big Ten tournament. And then we're going to get into March Madness next week, so I'm not going to say anything, but they have a pretty good outlook for that tournament as well. So it should definitely be very interesting to see. Moving on now to a little bit of NFL free agency. We listed down like some of the biggest signings and like a few winners that we thought really put together solid free agencies. We'll just kind of run down the list a little bit, add a few comments or so for each one, and really kind of just get you guys up to speed if you haven't been paying attention to a pretty wild free agency cycle. So to kind of start things off, the first one I have it written down here is T. Higgins, wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was franchise tagged for the second year in a row. He's making a hefty $26.18 million. That's a lot for a receiver, but obviously for T. Higgins' perspective, he was projected to hit free agency last year, got tagged. Same thing happened this year. And the Bengals, we've seen that they've been underwhelming in seasons past, especially this past season when they missed the playoffs. Came down to it in the last few weeks, and then obviously their defense is not looking great now with Trey Hendrickson requesting a trade and losing some of those defensive pieces. I don't know what the Bengals are kind of going for here. They need to revamp the defense, but they want to keep their receiving core around a Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to pair with Joe Burrow. I don't blame them, but definitely kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have as much knowledge on the Bengals, obviously, but especially after this past season with seeing them try and fight for that playoff spot in the last couple weeks, it literally came down to the last game. There was teams that they needed to lose to get in, and there was teams that they needed to win to get in, and it didn't end up shaping up for that. Obviously, Joe Burrow still had the comeback player of the year after not having a great start to his regular season, but like you said, there's a lot that they need to do to work on their defense more so than claiming these great wide receivers that they already have. Obviously, for the Lions, they signed DJ Reed, which is a huge sign for the defense. Repping it. I think that the most interesting sign was Sam Darnold.
Yeah, that was very, very interesting. And, I mean, it kind of made sense as everything kind of came together. Seattle just dealt Smith to the Raiders last week, so they obviously were in the market for a quarterback. The NFL draft class for a quarterback isn't as deep as we've seen it in years past, so I feel like they were kind of pressured to feel like they needed to make a move. Sam Darnold is coming off a fantastic bounce-back season.
Oh, absolutely.
In my opinion, he probably should have been up for comeback player of the year with how he put together a campaign. He was kind of written off by the Jets and the Panthers, signed with the Vikings, and absolutely just came out of nowhere. That whole team came out of nowhere with 14 wins last year. So for him to go to the Seahawks, it definitely should help, but the Seahawks also just traded DK Metcalf to the Steelers, and they released Tyler Lockett. So now they got Jackson Smith and Jigba, and they just signed Marcus Valdes-Scantling today. So completely kind of revamped offense for them.
Yeah.
I don't know how Sam Darnold's going to fit in and produce the same production as last year.
No, I agree. And honestly, some part of me, as a Lions fan, thank God he didn't re-sign, because I could not deal with the pressure of who's going to get the number 1 seed with 15 wins in a regular season. That was so stressful. Yeah. But good for him for building a name for himself, getting that hefty contract with Seattle. Obviously, we have no idea what's going to happen with them after releasing 2 of their best offensive weapons. Yeah. But it'll now be interesting to see what happens with the Vikings, because now they have J.J. McCarthy, who would be coming into his rookie season, and that would be a rebuild around him, honestly. After what we saw last year, obviously, you have Justin Jefferson, you have
Jordan Addison,
yes.
They have Jalen Naylor, some other strong pieces as well,
yes.
T.J. Hawkinson,
that's who I was, whatever. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with both of those teams, with both Minnesota and with Seattle, after giving Sam Darnold to Seattle, and now J.J. McCarthy is up for grabs with quarterback there. But obviously another big signing was Justin Fields signing with the Jets, who are also looking to revamp their team. Obviously they have... why am I just blanking on everything right now?
Yeah, their offense is pretty interesting. Garrett Wilson's their best receiver. Devontae Adams was released, so not as much firepower as they had last year with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. But like you said, the Jets have kind of been trying to figure things out since the 2011-2012 season. So this deal didn't really make a ton of sense for me. I would have rather them commit to a quarterback in the draft. They have a high top 10 draft position, so... Like, if you can't get one of the top 2, Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, in the draft, there's still options for you on the table. They obviously needed a bridge quarterback, but they signed him to a 2-year, $40 million deal for Justin Fields. So paying him hefty money if he is going to sit on the bench ultimately, again, kind of like he did in Pittsburgh. But I'd like to see the Jets draft a quarterback. But this signing could also be fun at the same point. Justin Fields has showed off his skills. He's a great runner, decent thrower at the ball. That's always kind of been a little bit of his weakness, which is not great for the quarterback position. But he doesn't have a ton of weapons around him. I think Garrett Wilson will definitely help. But I think it's just going to be more interesting rather than anything. I don't think the Jets are in any position to win now. They got a new head coach, Aaron Glenn. Their defense has been solid.
I was thinking of.
There you go. And Aaron Glenn's a defensive coach, so should be interesting how he kind of uses his cards with Justin Fields. But
I can't believe I completely just blanked on Aaron Glenn. Honestly, as a Lions fan, I have so much respect for Aaron Glenn. Obviously, he helped our defense do what it did this past season, even with having our entirety of the starting defense on IR, basically. So, it will be very interesting to see what the Jets do. New coach, new quarterback, who could possibly be sitting on the bench. What's going on with their offense? Like, there's so many questions up in the air. But with Aaron Glenn learning from Dan Campbell with under a coach who utilized the draft so well with him and Brad Holmes, it'll be interesting to see how Aaron Glenn takes that knowledge that he has from the Lions to bring to the draft with the Jets this summer.
Yeah, and Aaron Glenn was never able to kind of counter a mobile quarterback on defense, so it should be interesting to see what he does with that's in his hands now. But another signing that we thought was notable, I guess 2 that can go pair and pair here, is Carlton Davis and Milton Williams signed with the New England Patriots, both for hefty deals. 3 years, $54 million for Carlton Davis, and 4 years, $104 million for Milton Davis. I know as Lions fans, we kind of hoped Carlton Davis would come back, but getting DJ Reed, who was the number one cornerback on the market, definitely kind of helped replace that.
Absolutely.
But Carlton Davis did play well in Detroit, just battled some injuries, especially with that neck injury late in the season. But good signing for the Patriots. They've always had a very solid defense, and pairing Carlton Davis with Christian Gonzalez, who's still a very, very young and elite cornerback in the NFL, to learn alongside him will be great. Milton Williams was a big reason the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. That defensive line was absolutely disgusting there in Philly, and I think he will be able to kind of contribute some of that same production to New England. They got new head coach Mike Vrabel, so he used to coach Tennessee a few years back and took them on many deep playoff runs. So very good signings for the Patriots. They're committing kind of fully to defense, but it's good. You need to build around your quarterback, even if it's on the defensive side of the ball. Keep him off the field as much as you want. Drake May will definitely be able to take a leap in year 2 there for New England, but they got to get him some weapons. We'll get to that another day, but two good signings for the Patriots, I think.
I am absolutely heartbroken that Carlton Davis did not sign again with the Lions. He was he was the heart of our defense for a little bit there at the end especially after Hutch was hurt. Carlton Davis was so just driven, and he was so dedicated to being a Detroit Lion. So he's definitely gonna be a tough loss, obviously, with having DJ Reed sign. That's huge for us. That's a gain, but losing Carlton Davis is definitely a loss. But you talk about who Philly's losing Darius Slay.
Yeah,
that's a tough.
They've lost a good amount of their team.
That's probably a pretty tough one to lose for Philly, especially obviously they're coming off of a Super Bowl season. But there's definitely shakeups with those teams that were in the playoffs and
that were good last year is what you were trying to say. But I mean, Darius Slay's obviously like a little bit older than when he was in his prime now, kind of pushing past those days a little bit, but still a very solid contributor. The Eagles also traded C.J. Gardner-Johnson, another former Lion. A lot of the former Lions today, but they're revamping their defense a little bit. They kind of needed to because salary cap does unfortunately exist in the NFL. Unfortunately, so they kind of have to do that, but. Should be a nice little pickup for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've always had a solid DB room. Another former Steeler that was on the move as well, Najee Harris, signed with the Chargers for a year or 1 year, 5.25. He's been the definition of probably your above average ideal running back, 1,000 yards in all of his seasons in the NFL so far, but kind of nothing really exciting beyond that. But definitely another notable signing. Those are kind of like the big ones that we hadn't written down, but I did add two kind of teams that I thought really had a strong free agency. Those being the Patriots and the Bears. We talked a little bit on the Patriots with Carlton Davis and Milton Williams coming in. But they also signed linebacker Harold Landry to a 3-year, $43.5 million deal. Linebacker Robert Spillane to a 3-year, $37 million deal. Joshua Dobbs, he's not going to play, but a very, very solid backup, 2 years, $8 million. And Matt Collins, who came over from Buffalo, 2 years, $8.4. So they put a lot of money into this class. It wasn't really regarded as a crazy elite free agency class, but I think some of these signings are definitely in the right direction for them. Like, I know their offenses work like we needed to be, like we kind of said it before, but these defensive signings are not going to go under the radar. They're very good signings. Just kind of have to see how that meshes together with some potential rookies coming in or whatever, but very, very solid offseason for the Patriots. And we also written down the Bears here. I don't like saying that as a Lions fan, but they put together a very, very solid free agent class and offseason, if that. They brought in center Drew Dalman for a 3-year, $42 million deal. I'm going to butcher this name so bad, so I really apologize in advance. But defensive end Dayo Odeyingbo, 3 years, $48 million. I think that's about as good as I could probably get.
Yep, you did great.
For that. Appreciate it right there. Grady Jarrett was a big one coming in for 3 years, $43.5 million. Elite contributor there in Atlanta, one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. And they also revamped their offensive line, acquiring Joe Tooney and Jonah Jackson from the Chiefs and the Rams for draft picks this offseason. Bears put together a very solid class as well with a new kind of dynamic coming for their season upcoming.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And obviously having Ben Johnson. It's going to be interesting to see what the Bears can pull off. Obviously, Ben Johnson always talks about, he has a mobile quarterback now and how much he can do with him, blah, 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 whatever. But obviously some good signings. But I have a question.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Lions releasing Zadarius Smith?
You know, I liked it when he was brought in at the trade deadline this past year, but I know that his situation was a little bit different because he's not a number one guy at his age of 30-something years old with Hutchinson going down. I don't hate the fact that we didn't bring him back because the production was not there. Like, as I kind of said, different situation, but I don't think he was going to contribute anything that, like, wowed us. He was really hyped up when he came into the Lions.
Yes, he was.
Only recorded a few sacks. This edge class in the NFL draft is also really deep. So I have no problems kind of switching the focus to that if that's what Brad Holmes is going to do.
Which we know he will.
We know he will, but we also know he has tricks up his sleeve. So I really hope that he brings in an edge rusher or two or three that can really wreck the game because Aiden Hutchinson went down last year. We saw how this unit kind of struggled a little bit without getting pressure. Obviously, other bodies like Aleem McNeil went down, and Odes Rika can't stay on the field as much, but I think it was fine. Like, we can live without him, but we need to prioritize that position going forward. Same thoughts for you, or is it kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I was questioning it at first, which I think that a lot of Lions fans probably were, but obviously for me, I don't know the ideal draft class. I didn't know that there was a bunch of great, like, deep edge rushers coming in.
Deep this year.
So it'll be interesting to see what Brad Holmes can do with that. Obviously, we know him for using the draft. Took Hutch 4th overall, 3rd or second overall. I can't think about sports today. But like, you see how he's been able to utilize that draft. I mean, they took who's our running back? Jahmyr Gibbs. They took Jahmyr Gibbs at what, 12th or 12th overall, and we were shamed for it.
Yeah.
And we all
Jameson
as fans,
Williams too, was
JMO.
Yes.
But we were all as fans like, what are you doing? And then they turn out to be these amazing players that we might not be able to afford to keep.
Yeah.
But it'll definitely be. I was very questionable as to why they did that, but now I understand, and that's why I had to ask.
I love the questions coming my way. It's fun to talk about the Lions, but they should be fine moving forward. Just interesting to see their situation kind of develop over free agency, but lots of opportunities to capitalize. That was kind of a quick little free agency roundup, but moving gears to the NHL Trade Deadline for our last segment today. Madi, this is more your expertise, and I'm going to be probably stumbling like you a little bit with some of those thoughts coming straight to my mind, but I'll let you cook for this a little bit. But obviously, I think the biggest move was Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers for a 2027 second-round pick.
For a conditional 2027 second-round pick, too.
At that.
What are you doing? What are you doing? It was, as a Detroit Red Wings fan, I was on my phone in shock that the Bruins just traded their captain to the Florida Panthers. Out of any team, I mean, there were so many questions up in the air because Brad Marchand was possibly on the move. There were a lot of rumors circulating all over social media, all over everywhere, that Brad Marchand was possibly going to be traded at the deadline. And for a minute, Vegas Golden Knights tweeted and just said hi with a period. So we were all like, oh, here he goes. He's going to Vegas. No, he goes to Florida for a conditional 2027 second-round pick. That is horrible. That is such a kick in the butt for Brad Marchand. It just feels like such a stab in the back to him, especially as your captain when you're on a team that is just not producing as much as they have been. And now I put in there is only 7 players left on the Bruins roster from their 2022-2023 team where they broke the Red Wings record for most wins in a season. There's only 7 guys left on that team. The Bruins had an absolute fire sale this season. They're 30-28-8, and now they're winning games. They traded Brad Marchand. They traded Charlie Coyle. They traded Trent Frederick. They traded Brandon Carlo. They traded so many guys, but they got Casey Middlestat, who's a Big Ten guy. So shout out to Casey Middlestat. He went to Minnesota. He's a great offensive player. And then Henry
Chogaru, I think, or something like
Henry
that.
From the Colorado Avalanche. I don't want to butcher the last name. I would feel bad. And then obviously they got Fraser Minton from Toronto in the Brandon Carlo trade. But why? There's just so many questions about why the Bruins would do this, and obviously they weren't having the season that they wanted to have, and they completely lowballed Brad Marchand on another contract, which I think he was asking for just over $7 million, which may be a lot for an older guy, but he's still producing in a great way. He's still a great player. He's a great captain for the Bruins, and they were just like, all right, peace out. Here, give me a second-round pick back.
Yeah, conditional second-round
pick.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I know Marchand's 36, so, obviously, in terms of hockey, that's old. In terms of sports, that's old.
It's very old.
But just a great move for the Panthers to kind of swoop in there and take him.
Yeah.
I mean, they're sitting at 40-22-3. They're right back in the thick of things. They just won the Cup last year.
Exactly.
So they're gearing up to kind of do it again. I know... is Matthew Tkachuk injured? I can't.
He's on long-term IR, which has a lot of people questioning this. That's the thing. So they bring in Brad Marchand for that 2027 conditional second-round pick. Matthew Tkachuk is on long-term IR, so Brad Marchand will come in and swoop that top spot on the first line in place of Matthew Tkachuk. playoffs roll around, who's going to come off of long-term IR? Matthew Tkachuk. Here he comes. So it's going to be like Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, and Brad Marchand all on the same line. That is a rat line. Those three are, as Brad Marchand says, scumbags. It's insane. Like, Florida is going to be insane when the playoffs come around. So, yeah, Brad Marchand takes that spot of Matthew Tkachuk now. And then when Matthew Tkachuk is not injured anymore, he will be back in the lineup with...
Oh, my gosh. That's going to be, like, unreal for the defending champs. Like, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Kind of a steal for them. I think every hockey fan could kind of say that. Another team that was active at the deadline as well was the Buffalo Sabres. Kind of surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, they're sitting at 30th in the league right now, so bottom of the standings. They have not been able to get things going for quite some time now. Haven't made the playoffs since that 2011 season. So they shipped off Dylan Cozens and Dennis Gilbert to the Senators and a 2026 second-round pick. But they brought in Josh Norris, defenseman Jacob Bernard Docker. Great trade for the Senators.
Yeah.
Really great trade. What do you kind of think about this one?
I mean, Dylan Cozens has come in and just kind of exploded already with Ottawa. I think that was a great trade for them. And Josh Norris is very injury prone. So I think that it was tough for Ottawa to want to give up a young guy like that because I think he is 24, 25. He's not an old guy. He's still got a lot of time left, but I think he's had shoulder surgery. Like, he's had surgeries in the first few seasons that he's been in the league. So it is tough to see Josh Norris leave Ottawa because we knew that he could be a great player for them. But seeing Dylan Cozens come in and take that role as another young guy for a team that is also fighting tooth and nail to get into the playoffs was a great move for them. I don't know much about Dennis Gilbert and Jacob Bernard Docker, but obviously just swapping defensive players at that point. But for Dylan Cozens to go to Ottawa, I think that was a great move on Ottawa's part to attempt to get him. And obviously the Sabres are not looking to make the playoffs this year. They have first-year head coach Lindy Ruff was just hired in, and he's not a great coach. He coached in New Jersey for the past few years, and he was kind of absolutely horrible, except for 1 year where they made a fluke playoff and then lost in the second round. So Lindy Ruff was never great, went back to his home team of Buffalo. He played there when he was in the NHL, so it was, I don't know. Buffalo has been a mess for the last 20 years, almost. We just looked it up before we started this, actually. The last time Buffalo made the playoffs was 2010-2011 season. Yeah. So I think that the moves were interesting, getting rid of one of your best forwards coming in, one of your best young forwards, but you're getting a good young guy in return. He's just got to stay healthy through it.
Yeah, I think the return potentially could be a little bit underwhelming for Buffalo, especially dealing off one of your best players, if that. Yeah. Senators are sitting at 34, 25, and 5, so they're obviously looking to make that playoff push, like you said. Kind of like a little bit of a low risk, high reward kind of trade. Absolutely. I definitely think that's kind of how it's looking, but should kind of be interesting to see how that plays off for the Senators the rest of the season. It can only kind of, I think, help them, not as much hurt them. So good trade for them.
Absolutely.
For the sake of time, we're gonna hit on two more, I think, for the end of this segment, but. Former Red Wing and former elite gritty master Jake Wallman. That was one of my favorite players for the Wings. But
I loved Wally.
Oh, he was so fun to watch.
He was great.
That Penguins win where he hit the gritty was top 5 hockey moments of my life.
I was there for the shootout win against Vancouver. Or not shootout. He got a penalty shot against Vancouver last year, and I saw him do the gritty in person, and it was probably like one of the greatest moments of my entire life.
If you've never seen Jake Wallman do a gritty on skates on a hockey rink, please watch it. Absolute scenes.
It's life-changing.
But he bounced around a little bit this year. He was on the Sharks, signed a deal in free agency with them last season. But the Oilers just swooped in and acquired him for a 2026 conditional first-round pick. He's getting traded for a first-round pick. Look at him go. Is. But I think great trade for the Oilers. That's what they needed to do. They needed to add another guy. They were so close last year to winning it all. They need to capitalize on McDavid still being there for who knows how much longer now. I mean, they've been long overdue to really make another deep playoff run,
win a cup,
let alone win a championship.
Right.
So, if anything, this is going to help them.
Oh, yeah.
Just very Very sad to see him go.
I think that that's a really good thing. I feel like even though it was a pick and another forward from Edmonton. So that's got to make Jake Wallman feel a little bit better about him and his defensive play for getting traded for a first-round pick. Yeah. That's great. I think that Jake is really going to help with Edmonton trying to make that playoff push and just being a solid defenseman. We saw him produce when he was with the Red Wings, but not as well as he has this past season with the Sharks. He's been great with the Sharks, obviously playing on a team with a really, really, really young forward group, really young back end, have struggled a little bit with goaltending, so Sharks aren't looking great. Obviously had the first overall pick last year with Macklin Celebrini, so they know that they're a part of a rebuild. I think Jake has done a great job with helping them be a part of that rebuild. It's probably going to be tough to see him go from the Sharks, especially for those younger guys that look up to him as not a veteran player, but an older guy who's learned his way around the league a little bit more. But yeah, I think that's a great I think that's a great pickup from Edmonton to grab Jake to put into their back end, into their defense.
Yeah, the Sharks did everything they're supposed to. They sold one of their best players for high value right when they could at the end of the deadline when everything's kind of frantic. Absolutely. So I think definitely a good move for the Sharks. Oilers are, like we said, going to make that push again once more to kind of get back to where they were last year and definitely get over the hump. The last two, moves for the Red Wings that we want to touch on because we are Red Wings fans. We are. They bring back Peter Mrazek. I hope I did not butcher that because I practiced it before this episode. Perfect. They brought in a goalie from Chicago Blackhawks, and then they traded away Joe Veleno in this process. Both these players were not producing to their best standards, let alone average NHL standards this season. I feel like Mrazek is another average goalie. The Red Wings love bringing him in. They did it with Husso. Oh, yeah. They're doing it right now this season.
Steve Yzerman loves carrying like 14 goalies on his roster
that all do the same exact thing.
No reason.
And none of them are elite.
They're all bridge goalies too. They're all getting us to Sebastian Cossa, to Trey Augustine, to these younger guys that are in Grand Rapids that are trying to get up to the big leagues. But to bring back Peter Mrazek, I just have so many questions about why Steve Yzerman did this. I understand trading away Joe Veleno. He wasn't producing as much as we wanted him to this past season. He's been playing on the fourth line. He's been scratched a few games for the younger guys like Casper, like Soderblom. He's had his fair share of healthy scratches. But why couldn't we have traded away Hall? Why can't you just get rid of our bad defensive guys and pull up younger guys from Grand Rapids? There's guys down there that are probably a lot more ready than Hall and Petrie. Respect to my Michigan State guy, but he's just not good. Yeah, there are so many questions about what Steve Yzerman is doing. What is the Yzer plan? There's no Yzer plan. What's the plan, pal?
It's been loading for too long.
Right.
This plan was supposed to kick in. Yeah, this plan was supposed to kick in 3 years ago. They've been so close to the playoffs for too many seasons now. 2 seasons in a row where they've been right there. Last season was a heartbreaker at the end, with Washington getting in for that last spot. But I mean, it's very confusing what the Red Wings are doing right now because they've been such a weird team this year.
So weird.
They've lost a few straight. They'll go out and win 8 straight. Fired their coach, brought in McClellan. He went on. He caught fire.
2 7-game win streaks.
2 7-game win streaks when he got hired, and now they're
on 6. Now they're on a 6-game losing streak.
Get yourself a team that can win 7 straight and then lose 6 straight right after. I mean, it does not come around often, and I think it's just.
But we've got it right here in Detroit.
Haven't made the playoffs in 16, so it's just this team's confusing. They have young guys. They have a great pool of young guys that they're.
Oh my gosh, they have one of the best AHL teams. Period. They have so many young guys down there that are. I don't know if they're ready to come up, but they're producing they're so great down in Grand Rapids. And the same goes for, I think, Chicago, the Rockford IceHogs, and the Grand Rapids Griffins have the best AHL teams in the league right now. They both have great farm systems. They just got to figure out a way to get them up there. But we can't because we have Jeff Petrie on a $34 million contract for 19 years, it feels like.
No, at some point you got to realize it's time to shift the focus, get your young guys some time. It's reminding me of the Detroit Tigers situation where they were like in the midst of competing a little bit, flirted with the playoffs, and then brought up some of the young guys, and they went on a run last year to make the playoffs.
Right.
It needs to happen, and it's at some point you can't just keep relying on your guys that are getting older, just playing them because they have a contract that's going to cost you a little bit of money. It's okay to shift the focus to some of those younger guys sometimes. The Red Wings have been long overdue to make the playoffs now. It's got a lot of fans frustrated. There's no awards for having the best farm system in the NHL.
Right.
You have to be able to contribute and produce at the next level. They've had probably a top farm system for this entire Iser
How
plan
many
that we
years?
call it. But the winning has not contributed at the main level. Just sad to see. But, I mean, these moves kind of don't really make a ton of sense or have a
Right.
ton of significance for the rest of the season. But
And we can't keep bringing in 35-year-old goalies who only have a year left in them, who can't win 20 games in a season alone.
Maddie's about to crash out.
Why? I am. The Red Wings make me want to crash out. It's ridiculous that we cannot make the playoffs.
And it's right there, too. It's right there.
Right.
I know. It's just such a sad
I
season.
don't want to doubt Steve Yzerman, but I'm beginning to doubt Steve Yzerman. I don't want to do it. There's so many questions. So
Yeah.
many questions.
Something's got to happen soon, or else those doubts will start to come into play. But I think before we kind of rip our hair out of our heads for this episode, we might just call it there because it could get ugly.
It will get ugly. Don't keep
Not
talking to me
good.
about the Red Wings.
It would get ugly. But
Out.
this was definitely a fun episode to do, kind of switch it up from
Yeah.
the norm a little bit. Like we said, stay tuned next week because we are going to be doing I don't know if it's the first ever, so I am not going to make that claim, but Roundtable is going to do a March Madness bracket here collectively.
Woohoo.
We're going to bring back in guest PJ for a collective March Madness bracket. You don't want to miss that. It'll be lots of fun with Selection Sunday coming up this Sunday. But that's going to do it here for us on this episode. Thanks again, Maddie, for joining me. It's always been a pleasure, and we will see you guys next week. We better.